It started with the prescription bottle. Not hers, not mine. A white plastic cylinder tucked neatly in the side pocket of her gym bag, the one she kept in the back of her car, rarely touched during the week. I only grabbed it because she'd left her keys on the counter, and I'd offered to bring her phone charger to work. Her car was unlocked. Habit. Trust. But the bottle, the label read prenatal vitamins, and the date printed was less than a month old. That alone wasn't the part that rattled me. We'd been trying for a kid on and off for 2 years. She'd stopped charting her cycle 6 months ago, told me she was taking a break, that the pressure was killing the mood. I agreed. I believed her. I gave her space. So why was this hidden? Why in the car, and not in our bathroom, with the rest of her routine stuff? I stood there in the driveway, sun creeping down behind the neighbor's fence, staring at that bottle like it was something radioactive. I turned it over. There was no pharmacy name, no OB/GYN I recognized. Just a generic label, like it was filled at some low-end online supplier. That part made sense. If you didn't want your husband to see a refill coming in the mail, you wouldn't use insurance. You'd pay cash. Quiet, invisible. My pulse didn't spike. No rage. Just silence in my chest. Like something had turned off. A low hum of awareness, cold and precise, started crawling its way down my spine. I slid the bottle back exactly where I'd found it, took a photo on my phone, and closed the gym bag. There was no anger, only clarity. Something had shifted, and it wasn't going back. I returned her keys, drove to her office, handed her the charger through the window, and smiled. She kissed my cheek and asked about dinner. I said I'd cook. That seemed to please her. And that night, while she showered, I stared at the reflection in the microwave door as I stirred pasta, wondering how many lies a person could tell without stumbling. She came out in that oversized t-shirt she always wore to bed, sat at the counter, and told me about her co-worker's baby shower, how much she missed holding a baby, how she felt ready again. My fingers never stopped moving. I stirred, plated, cleaned. She didn't notice I wasn't eating. The next morning, I checked our bathroom cabinet. No vitamins. No test strips. Nothing but the same old box of Tylenol and some half-used skincare stuff she never really liked. I rifled through the trash under the sink when she left for work. Nothing recent. No packaging. I didn't find a test. No box. No receipts. Which made the vitamins in her car even louder somehow, like a siren she was pretending no one else could hear. It didn't make sense. If she was pregnant, why hadn't she told me? And if she wasn't, why pretend? 2 nights later, the second fracture came. She left her phone on the bathroom counter while brushing her teeth, and I noticed a name in her notifications, Leo, volunteer team. The message preview was small, but there was nothing professional about it. I keep replaying last night in my head. Your skin, the way you had cut off. She rinsed, spat, and came out smiling, asking if I wanted to watch that new show together. I said sure. Sat next to her on the couch. Let her tuck her legs under mine like always. But I didn't hear the TV. I heard that message. I saw that bottle. I remembered how she'd stopped tracking her cycle right after she met him. Leo, the guy from the food drive, the one she said was just passionate about giving back. The one she'd introduced to me with that overly bright tone, like she was forcing chemistry where there was none. I shook his hand. He was all charisma and eye contact, the type that leaned in too close. I'd pegged him as needy, a guy looking for validation in other people's wives. But I hadn't pegged her as the type to bite. Now I knew better. She fell asleep early that night, her head on my chest. I watched the ceiling until midnight. My hand drifted to her belly, soft under the fabric, the slightest curve starting to show. If I hadn't seen the bottle, I might have thought she was just gaining weight. I might have believed her when she said her appetite was back. I might have thought the glow on her face lately was because of me. Instead, I saw the beginning of a plan. Hers, not mine. And I was going to let it play out, every last act, before I ended the show. We had a rhythm, the kind couples settle into after enough years together, predictable, maybe, but comfortable in its own way. She'd come home around 6, drop her bag by the door, kiss me on the cheek without breaking stride, and head to the bedroom to change. I'd pour her a glass of wine before she even asked. We didn't fight. We didn't talk much about feelings, but we laughed at the same shows and held hands in public. I thought that was enough. I thought the quiet between us was peace, not absence. Looking back, I realized now the first sign wasn't the silence, but the performance. She started humming in the mornings. That was new. Soft, content little tunes while brushing her teeth or tying her shoes. She smiled more, stretched longer in the mirror, ran her fingers through her hair like she was noticing herself for the first time in a long time. But the smile rarely turned in my direction. She'd say things like, "I feel lighter lately," or, "I finally started getting my energy back," and I'd nod, assuming it was the vitamins working or her new morning jogs. I didn't ask too many questions. I was happy to see her happy. That's the trick of betrayal. It hides behind joy. It wears the mask of self-discovery. And if you love someone enough, you'll celebrate it, even while it cuts you out. She started staying late after work for project meetings, something she hadn't done since her promotion a year ago. Then came the book club. She joined it on a whim, said she needed intellectual stimulation again, that she missed the feeling of ideas bouncing around. I encouraged it. I even bought her a Kindle to make it easier. But she never used it. Only physical copies, always new ones, always left in the passenger seat of her car. Once, I picked one up and flipped through it. Half the pages were marked with sticky notes, little scribbles in the margins that didn't match her handwriting. I asked who she was reading with. She said, "Just some women from work," and gave me a quick peck on the forehead before changing the subject to weekend plans. It was always like that, half answers followed by quick distractions. A magician's misdirection, only I hadn't realized I was part of the act. She talked about boundaries more often, like the word had suddenly become sacred. She wanted time to journal, space to think, silence after dinner. I try not to take it personally. I figured it was her version of a reset. Maybe I'd leaned too much into routine. Maybe she needed to find herself again, and I should have supported that. So I did. I pulled back. I gave her the quiet she asked for. She took longer showers, started using scented oils she'd never liked before. Earthy, musky, like she was trying to smell like someone else. Her phone became a constant presence at her side. She used to leave it on the nightstand without a second thought. Now, it was face down everywhere she went. She said it was to disconnect from the noise, but I noticed how she still picked it up the second a notification buzzed. One Friday, she came home with a new pair of boots. Black leather, high-end, the kind that click when they hit the floor. She never wore heels. She hated the noise. Said it made her feel too obvious, too seen. But these were deliberate. Statement pieces. She said they were on sale. The next week it was a silk blouse, deep burgundy, low cut. I asked if it was for work. She said no, it was just for her. I didn't ask again. That's how she made you feel stupid for caring, by saying things that made you question why you even noticed. It's just a shirt. It's just a dinner. It's just a phase. The kind of phrases that build walls you're not allowed to climb. Then came the day I noticed her social media had changed. I wasn't blocked, just restricted. Subtle. I could still see her old posts, but the new ones weren't showing up. When I asked if she'd posted anything lately, she smiled and said, "Just boring stuff. You wouldn't care." I wanted to believe her. I still believed her, even as I sat in our bed one night, scrolling through a second account I'd made out of sheer instinct, and saw her tagged in a group photo I hadn't taken. She looked different in it. Not just the makeup or the posture, but the way her eyes sparkled, pointed toward someone standing just outside the frame. Not me. That much I knew. She stopped asking me to come to her events. Stopped checking if I was hungry when she made dinner for herself. I'd walk into a room and feel like a guest, like I was interrupting something. Her moods shifted without warning, irritated one moment, glowing the next. She'd text me from across the house if she needed something, like even our voices were too close. I once found a parking receipt in her coat pocket for a part of town she'd said she hadn't visited in weeks. When I asked, she said it must have been old. I turned it over. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. Still, I said nothing. I told myself it was work stress. Hormones. A phase. I was her husband. I was supposed to understand. But even then, with her head resting inches from mine, I knew she was somewhere else entirely. And I was starting to understand the cruelest part of betrayal wasn't when the knife went in. It was how gently she smiled as she turned the blade. It was a Wednesday. Unremarkable, like most betrayals are until they bare their teeth. She said she had a therapy session after work, something new she'd added to her self-care routine. I encouraged it, like always. Told her to take her time, even packed her a water bottle and some almonds in case she got hungry. She kissed me quickly, almost gratefully, and left. I watched her taillights disappear down the street and waited exactly 5 minutes before walking back inside, straight to the desktop we almost never used. She always kept her phone close, but her laptop? That was different. Too bulky to carry around, and she never expected me to touch it. The password hadn't changed. She never thought she needed to. My fingers moved calmly, deliberately, no shaking, no hesitation. This wasn't a breach of trust. This was confirmation of the death of it. Her email was mostly clean, no smoking guns, until I saw the other inbox, the one filled with confirmations, newsletters, things she likely never even looked at. That's where I found it. A receipt from a boutique hotel across town. One night stay, 2 guests, the room booked under the name A. Taylor. I clicked through to the digital invoice. The stay was from last week. She told me she was attending a late-night sound bath class. I remember because she came home glowing, said it released something spiritual. She'd smelled like bergamot and sex. I didn't breathe for a full minute. Didn't blink. Just stared at the screen, memorizing every detail, room number, time of check-in, payment method, her personal credit card. A red flag dressed in familiarity. I checked her calendar, nothing listed that night. No mention of any session, no entry about wellness or self-growth. Just blank space where the lie had slipped in and out unnoticed. That's when I heard her phone buzz in the bedroom. She hadn't taken it. That alone was rare. I walked in, picked it up. One message, just a preview on the lock screen. No name. Just a number. Your hand's still on my hips. Can't stop thinking about it. I stood there for a moment, the phone warm in my hand, the rest of me cold. My eyes traced the ceiling like it might tell me something useful, like it could explain how a woman who once cried over a dead bird in our backyard could now orchestrate deception so effortlessly. I unlocked the phone. She never changed the code. She never needed to. I'd never given her a reason to be afraid of me. Until now. I didn't scroll through the entire message thread. I didn't need to. The first few texts were enough. Long threads of shared memories I wasn't a part of, nicknames I'd never heard, private jokes built in the quiet spaces she once claimed were hers alone. He called her Elle, she called him my Leo. That part hurt more than I expected. I'd never used that name, not even once. She always said she hated how it sounded. Too theatrical, she told me. But apparently it rolled off her tongue just fine now. There were photos too. Blurry, intimate ones. Him in her passenger seat. Her hand on his thigh. A mirror selfie she'd taken in the red blouse I thought she wore for me. My pulse slowed, thick and heavy in my ears. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I just placed it gently back on the nightstand, screen down, exactly how she liked it. I sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the wall, not really seeing it, just hearing echoes. Her laugh from 2 nights ago. The way she said, "I love you," while looking at her reflection in the microwave door, not at me. When she came home later that night, she smiled. Told me therapy was emotionally draining, but so needed. She kissed me softly, went a shower. I watched her walk away, every movement calculated, effortless. She didn't know I knew. Not yet. I sat at the kitchen table while the water ran. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing names, dates, places. I mapped every lie I could recall, every inconsistency, every shift in tone. I remembered what she wore each time she came home glowing. I remembered the nights she didn't touch me, the mornings she hummed. Every puzzle piece she thought she'd hidden now snapped into place. I wasn't confused anymore. I was crystallized. Pure, sharp awareness. She was still playing house. Still believing she could live 2 lives. She didn't understand what she'd done, not just to me, but to herself. She thought she was in control. She thought she was untouchable. But now I was awake. And there was no going back to sleep. She still thought I believed her. That was her first mistake. The second was underestimating how quiet a man can become when he's finished grieving. I didn't lash out. I didn't hint at suspicion. I smiled when she made dinner, complimented her on her outfit, even offered to run errands so she could have more time for herself. She thanked me, called me thoughtful, kissed me with lips that had kissed someone else hours earlier. And I let her. I played the part so well I think I started to fool even her again. But beneath that still surface, I was already building the skeleton of her collapse. I started simple, her calendar. I took a photo of each week's entries every Sunday night when she fell asleep. The pattern was obvious. Therapy on Wednesdays, book club on Fridays, yoga every second Saturday. I never asked questions, I just watched. The next time she left for therapy, I sent a courier to the address she claimed to visit. A blank envelope addressed to her, just to confirm if she was physically there. The courier texted me a photo of the front desk, no sign of her. The receptionist didn't recognize the name. I thanked him, paid double, deleted the message. That same night, she came home late, blamed traffic, said her therapist wanted her to sit with some heavier emotions. I nodded and asked if she wanted tea. She said yes. She always said yes when she wanted to feel like she was still good. I checked our joint credit card transactions. Her personal one was mostly clean, but I'd been the one who set up the alerts for the shared account, back when I thought I was protecting us from overdraft fees. Now I was using it to track her movements. Twice, she'd made purchases at a gas station on the far side of town, nowhere near her work or any known errand routes. One charge at 8:42 p.m., long after she claimed to be home from yoga. I looked up the address. Right across from a rundown motel she would never set foot in if she wasn't there for someone else. I didn't follow her. I followed her best friend, Amanda. She was the alibi for almost every girls' night, every emergency vent session she swore she needed. So I followed Amanda. Not in person. I just checked her public Instagram stories from a dummy account every weekend. Amanda was sloppy. She posted real-time updates constantly, what she was drinking, where she was eating, who she was with. And she wasn't with my wife. Not once. One night, I texted my wife while she was allegedly with Amanda, and she didn't answer for over an hour. When she finally replied, she said her phone had died. I said no problem. I said I trusted her. That was the moment I saw her eyes really relax. She thought she'd won. That was when I knew I had her exactly where I wanted her. I planted questions like mines. Do you still talk to that guy from the food drive? I asked casually one night. She tilted her head like she was trying to remember. Leo? No, he moved to Austin, didn't he? Her lie was smooth, but not perfect. She forgot that I'd seen the message thread, the timestamps, the photos. I nodded and sipped my coffee. She smiled. I asked her what she and Amanda talked about at dinner last Friday. She blinked, fumbled, said something vague about relationship boundaries and childhood wounds. I let her spiral for a bit, then changed the subject. Every lie she told became a thread I wrapped around her, tight and invisible. I checked our home Wi-Fi history. Her phone had been connecting to the network less and less on nights she claimed to be home. I set up a device that logged MAC addresses and connection times. She wasn't even aware. She still thought tech was my hobby, not my weapon. I watched her change her hair, wear new lingerie I hadn't touched, delete her location history on her Google account. That last one sealed it. She only started deleting once she thought she was close to being caught, which meant she knew she was dirty, but still wanted to win. That told me she wasn't sorry, only scared. And scared people make mistakes. I kept a journal, separate from everything else, locked and stashed in the garage under the insulation rolls. Every conversation, every inconsistency, every lie. I wasn't documenting to confront. I was documenting to destroy, to control the narrative, to ensure when this ended, it wouldn't be a messy explosion. It would be a surgical removal. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to weep. I was going to watch her step deeper into the illusion while I turned every detail into ammunition. She was already caught. She just didn't know it yet. I waited until her nonprofit's anniversary gala, an event she'd spent 3 months obsessing over. She was the face of it, the heart of the campaign, giving interviews about compassion, commitment, community values. It was being held in a luxury hotel ballroom downtown, with soft jazz playing and donors milling around with champagne flutes and fake smiles. She wore a backless green dress I hadn't seen before, and for a moment, I imagined it was meant for me. But I already knew it wasn't. I'd seen her wear it in a photo taken by Leo in the mirror of that motel room. I had everything by then. Messages, voice memos, and one very clear video of her walking out of his car at 1:17 a.m., laughing, barefoot, carrying her heels. She thought she was careful, but Leo was reckless. He'd used his real name on the motel registration, left his phone location on. The trap was simple. I offered to sponsor a table under my company's name, said I'd invite some friends from work, but I didn't. Instead, I bought out the table, filled the seats with ghosts, and placed one small screen, an iPad, muted and on loop, dead center at the table, hidden under a napkin, set to play a curated 5-minute video. Her voice. His. Laughter. A shot of her hand wrapped around his as they walked into the motel. I timed it so she would walk past the table around 8:15, just before her speech. And when she did, the napkin slipped off just as I planned, just as I stood behind her, silent. She froze. Her face changed in slow motion, first confusion, then horror, then a half-second attempt to compose herself. She spun, almost graceful, and said my name too brightly, like she was trying to summon normalcy. What is this? She asked, eyes wide. That's not what it looks like. She reached for the tablet, trying to pause the footage, but I stepped forward and took it in one hand. holding it out of reach like a parent removing a dangerous toy. You're blowing this out of proportion, she hissed, keeping her voice low. We were just talking. He was going through something. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I just watched her unravel, strand by strand. You never listened to me anymore, she whispered, trying to twist the knife before I could draw mine. You haven't touched me in weeks. I thought you didn't want me. And then came the grin, the venom-coated smirk of someone who thinks they still have the upper hand. You act like some noble victim, but you haven't asked me if I'm happy in years. Maybe Leo just reminded me I was still desirable. I leaned in close, still calm, still ice. And maybe he'll remind you what it feels like to lose everything, I said, each word clipped, emotionless. The smirk shattered. Her eyes searched mine for mercy, found none, and the panic bloomed fast. Please, she said now, lower, frantic. We can fix this. You didn't have to do this here. She glanced around the room, suddenly aware of how many people were starting to notice her flushed cheeks, her rigid stance, the sharp way her voice pitched. Let's go somewhere private, she begged. Let's just talk. Please. I turned the iPad off and slipped it back into my coat pocket. Then I stepped to the side, just far enough to let the space between us become obvious. This is private, I said quietly. It's just finally honest. She reached for my arm, nails pressing in like she thought she could ground herself through touch, but I didn't flinch. Her voice trembled now, something between anger and fear. You think you're so righteous. But this is cruel. You planned this. You wanted to humiliate me. I tilted my head slightly. No, I said, looking her in the eye. I wanted you to see what I see. You just hate mirrors. She didn't speak after that. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Just the quiet collapse of ego, the realization that nothing she said could reassemble what she'd broken. And I stood there, perfectly still, not leaving. Not yet. Letting the silence stretch and wrap around her like a noose made of her own choices. The room buzzed around us, but in that small circle of truth, everything was frozen. Suspended, held in the cold grip of revelation. She followed me out of the ballroom like a shadow unraveling, her heels snapping against the marble floor, the hem of her dress trembling with each sharp breath. The doors shut behind us with a muted thud, sealing off the music, the people, the last remnants of her carefully curated image. Out here, it was just her and me and the raw, echoing silence she couldn't manipulate. You don't get to do this, she hissed, her voice already splintering. You don't get to paint me as the villain like you're some kind of saint. I said nothing. I didn't look at her. I walked to the valet desk, handed over the ticket, and stood with my hands in my pockets while she paced beside me like a caged animal. You always wanted control, didn't you? That's what this is. Some power trip. You planned this like it was a damn movie. Who does that? Her laugh cracked out, shrill and venom-laced, but I didn't flinch. The more she spoke, the more frantic she became, like she needed my reaction to feel alive. I was suffocating, and you didn't even see it. You were always there, like a shadow, like a goddamn ghost with nothing to say and no passion. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to cheat? She stepped in front of me now, eyes wide, wild. You made me do this. You treated me like a roommate. You never touched me, never saw me. I tilted my head slightly, finally meeting her gaze, and said, calm and even, Leo did. Her mouth snapped shut like a trap just missed its prey. Her jaw trembled, hands balled into fists at her sides. You're disgusting, she spat. A real man would have fought for me. Screamed. It's something. Anything. But not you. You just watched me fall and waited for your moment. I didn't blink. I watched you jump. She recoiled like I'd slapped her, like the precision of that one line pierced deeper than any insult could. This wasn't even about him, she barked, shifting gears, desperate to gain ground. It was about me. I needed to grow. You kept me trapped in that boring little life like it was some fairy tale. I didn't respond. I stepped forward to take the keys from the valet, nodded my thanks, and turned back to her with the kind of quiet that speaks louder than a scream. You were never trapped, I said. You just didn't want to walk out without someone waiting on the other side. That one hit. Her face twisted, first with rage, then with something like shame, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. You know what the worst part is, she said, eyes glinting with something sharp and bitter. I never loved you. Not the way you think. I loved the version of you that was too weak to see this coming. The one who worshipped me. She was testing, reaching, trying to cut. I smiled. You loved the reflection, not the man. That silence after nearly crushed her. She took a step back, unsteady, like her own weight was turning foreign to her. So what now? She asked, voice suddenly small. You're done? Just like that? You get your revenge, your moment, and you walk away? You think that makes you strong. I stepped closer, slowly, until the space between us shrank to nothing. You think I did this to win? I said, quiet and calm. No. I did this so you'd never lie to another man and think you got away with it. Her breath caught. Her eyes searched mine for anything, anger, heartbreak, even pain. But there was nothing left for her to twist. No emotion to exploit. And that scared her more than anything else I could have said. She wanted a war. She got an execution. You can't just erase everything we had, she whispered then, voice trembling, trying one last mask, one last illusion of shared history. We built a life together. That has to mean something. I shook my head once, slowly. It meant everything. Until it meant nothing. Her lips parted, a protest half formed, but no sound came. She stood there, trembling in that perfect green dress, her mascara smudged, her hands empty, and I watched the realization settle behind her eyes, that nothing she said could reach me now. That I wasn't angry because anger still implies connection. I wasn't cold because I hated her. I was indifferent because she was nothing. And the moment a manipulator feels that truth, really feels it, is the moment they break. And she was already breaking. Not from guilt, not from loss, but from the terrifying certainty that her power was gone, and she would never get it back. I began with the finances, because that's where people bleed slow and don't realize they're dying until it's too late. She still thought we had time, that things were in limbo, that I needed space, that maybe she could salvage it. She didn't see the bloodless smile I wore when I handed her coffee in the morning, the way I let her think I was reflecting, healing, maybe even softening. She had no idea that every shared account had already been stripped, every card deactivated, every automatic payment rerouted to my private ones. I'd spent weeks documenting everything, every ATM withdrawal she made before her motel visits, every Uber receipt that contradicted her lies, every message she'd sent him while I was in the same room. I compiled it all into a clean, numbered PDF. No commentary. Just facts. Screenshots, timestamps, hotel invoices, a detailed timeline of her duplicity. That file was sent to two places, my divorce attorney and her father. Not out of spite, but because he once told me, straight-faced and proud, if she ever disrespects the man who builds her world, she'll lose mine too. I made sure he saw just how deeply she'd torn through that world. I didn't make a scene. I simply copied him on the email and left the subject line blank. I knew he'd call her first. That's what made it better. No dramatic confrontation, just silence from me, and judgment from the one man she still tried to impress. The car she drove was in my name, fully paid off, insurance under my policy. She came out of yoga one afternoon to find it gone. Towed? No. Reclaimed. I had the spare key and a flatbed waiting. She texted me, furious, confused, demanding to know what happened. I replied with 2 words, check ownership. I'd already leased myself a new one the week before. Better model, better engine. She didn't deserve the dust from the tires. Next came the house. It was mine, bought 2 years before I met her, title clean, no joint deed. She thought marriage gave her partial rights. She was wrong. I called the locksmith while she was still at work, had every lock changed before dinner. Her key no longer worked. I watched her try it through the security camera she didn't know I'd upgraded. She jiggled the handle, stepped back, stared at the door like it betrayed her. She rang the bell once, then again. I didn't answer. I texted her. Your things are packed and waiting at Amanda's. Amanda, her alibi, her shield, her partner in lies, was the perfect place for her to feel both safety and shame. I made sure the suitcase I dropped off was filled with all the right items. Lingerie she bought for Leo, love notes she hid in drawers, every romantic trinket that didn't belong in my house anymore. I placed the prenatal vitamins on top, like a signature. She would open it, and Amanda would be there, and the silence between them would be louder than any confrontation I could orchestrate. Then I went deeper. I contacted the HR department of her nonprofit. Not with venom, just clarity. I explained, respectfully and privately, that one of their lead organizers had been misrepresenting her time, submitting hours spent with her affair partner as working late, claiming false reimbursements for meals she'd actually shared with Leo. I attached receipts. They didn't reply directly, but a friend on the board texted me 2 days later. She's on leave. What the hell happened? I didn't answer. I wanted them to ask her. I wanted her to explain, stammer, scramble. I wanted the walls to close in from every direction: home, work, friends, family. until there was nowhere left for her to retreat to. I'd even considered exposing her to Leo, turning him against her, but I realized I didn't need to. He was already fading, stopped texting, stopped calling. Probably felt the heat when I slipped that little folder into his work inbox, filled with pictures of her with me, videos of our life, our wedding, her vows. He saw what she threw away, and men like him don't want to hold garbage when it stinks of someone else's past. She tried calling me again. I let it ring. She tried emailing, begging for a conversation. I let it sit unread. When she finally knocked on my office door one afternoon, hollow-eyed, makeup smeared, the same dress from yesterday still clinging to her like guilt, I opened it just enough to look her in the eye. She said she had nowhere to go, that she didn't understand how it all unraveled so fast, that I was being cruel. I didn't speak. I just held up a copy of the file I'd sent to her father. She blinked. I handed it to her and said, flatly, "This is what you built." I just let it fall, and I closed the door before she could speak again. That was the most satisfying part. Watching the architect of deception finally stand in the ruins of her own design, with no one left to blame but herself. The night of her sister's engagement party was supposed to be her triumphant return to form, a moment to sparkle, to reclaim the image she thought she could still control. She wore white, even though she wasn't the bride, because she needed the room to look at her, not the couple. She painted on her old smile, the practiced one with the tilted head and the laugh that always came half a second too late. I was already there when she arrived, dressed sharp, standing beside her father, who hadn't returned a single one of her calls since the file landed in his inbox. Her mother looked at her, but said nothing. Her sister nodded, barely. Amanda didn't even come. Said she had plans. The walls were closing in, but she still walked in like the room was hers, shoulders back, chin high, thinking she could spin this back to her favor with enough charm and just the right tone of faux sincerity. She hadn't seen the screen yet. The family had put together a slideshow, photos from childhood, vacations, funny clips, meant to play during dinner. What she didn't know was that her brother, the tech-savvy one she once mocked for being obsessive, had reached out to me 3 days ago. Said he didn't appreciate being lied to. Said he wanted to know the truth. I didn't have to ask him to do anything. I just gave him the folder. The screen lit up halfway through the night. Laughter turned to silence in less than 30 seconds. At first, the photos looked normal. Then came the text messages. Her words. Her voice in audio clips, whispering to Leo in the dark. A photo of her outside the motel. A shot of her with Leo's hand on her thigh, time-stamped and undeniable. Her name on the motel invoice. Every message, every detail, arranged not for shock, but for clarity. The final slide simply read, "There's no version of the truth where you're the victim." The room was silent. Utterly, painfully silent. She stood frozen near the appetizer table, one hand still wrapped around a flute of champagne that hadn't been touched. Her smile was still there, but it was wrong now, twitching at the corners, jaw tight. She laughed once. Forced. "This is a joke," she said too loudly. "It's fake. Obviously fake." No one replied. Her father stepped back slightly, as if her presence suddenly made the air harder to breathe. Her mother looked away. Her sister stared, unblinking. "Okay," she snapped, voice rising. "You all want to judge me? Like you're saints? Like you don't make mistakes?" The cracks were visible now, her voice no longer steady, her face flushed, that frantic glint in her eyes she couldn't mask. "He manipulated this," she pointed at me. "He did this because I hurt his ego. That's all this is. A wounded man lashing out." I said nothing. I didn't move. I simply stood there, hands in my pockets, calm, watching. And that made it worse. She turned toward me, desperate for anything, anger, a fight, a reaction, but I gave her none. Just the truth in my silence. "Say something," she screamed, voice breaking. "You want to ruin me? Congratulations. You've made your point. You think this makes you better than me?" Her lip trembled. No one stepped in. No one defended her. She looked around for Leo. He wasn't there. He'd already gone silent days ago, vanished the second his inbox received the truth. She'd called him 13 times in one day. "I know." I watched them ring out. "This isn't me," she whispered now, to no one in particular. "I'm not this person. You all know me. You know who I am." But they didn't. Not anymore. Because the version of her they knew had been buried beneath her own choices. The woman standing in that room was a stranger in a stolen white dress, clutching a glass like it was a lifeline, drowning in the silence of 100 eyes that no longer admired her. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Every second I remained in that room was a verdict. Every breath I took without looking away was a mirror she couldn't break. She finally dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor. No one flinched. No one gasped. And in that stillness, in that echo of her own destruction, she finally broke. Not with a scream, not with a tantrum, but with a collapse, knees buckling, hands trembling, eyes wide with the awful, dawning realization that she had burned the very world that once worshipped her, and that the man she betrayed was the one still standing while she fell. The chaos started with her voice, too sharp and too loud, cutting through the quiet like a blade as she stormed toward me across the living room packed with family and friends, the aftermath of her collapse at the engagement party still fresh in everyone's memory. "You think this makes you a hero?" she screamed, voice cracking under the weight of desperation, mascara still smeared beneath her eyes, dress wrinkled from the night she didn't sleep. "You think exposing me makes you some noble victim?" Her father stood behind her, jaw clenched, arms folded, shame carved into his features like stone. My sister leaned against the fireplace, arms crossed, silently watching. Her mother looked away as if even seeing her daughter speak was too much to bear. "You planned this like a coward," she spit, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You had your little slideshow, your little tricks, like you're some mastermind. But you're pathetic. You didn't fight for me. You didn't care. You just wanted to win." I stepped forward, calm but lit from within with something I hadn't let out since it all started. "Fight for what?" I said, voice like steel wrapped in ice. "For the woman who called me boring while she spread her legs in a motel bed she paid for with her money? For the woman who cried about boundaries while she let another man kiss the mouth that lied to me every night?" The room tensed, gasps rolling across like thunder. She flinched, but didn't stop. "You always act like you're perfect. Like you didn't slowly kill us with your silence. Your dull routines. Your controlling nature. I needed something real. I needed to feel alive again." Her voice rose, almost a wail now. "Leo made me feel like I mattered. Then where is he?" I shot back, stepping closer. "Where's your savior now, huh? Because last I checked, he ran the second he saw what you really are. He wanted the fantasy, and you gave it to him. But reality? Real love? He didn't want that. That was mine, and you threw it away for cheap thrills and $2 lies." Her friends stood off to the side, one of them recording, eyes wide. One of them whispered something about how she always seemed off lately. The room was a minefield of shame and broken loyalty, and she was in the center, spinning. "I gave you everything," she snarled. "My youth. My body. My time. And you didn't even notice when I started to disappear." "No," I said, taking another step, and now people were trying to ease between us, but I held up one hand and they froze. "You didn't disappear. You rotted. Right in front of me. You looked me in the eye and lied, again and again, because it made you feel powerful. And the second you saw someone else giving you attention, you broke every vow you made. Don't pretend this is about neglect. This is about ego. Yours." She turned to her father, desperate now, tears finally spilling over. "Dad, are you just going to stand there? Say something. Tell him he's gone too far." But he didn't move. Didn't even blink. He just said, "You did this. All of this." He just made sure we saw it. And that shattered something in her. She looked back at me, voice trembling. "You wanted to hurt me. Admit it. You wanted to see me suffer." "No," I said, cold and final. "I wanted you to see what you are without your lies propping you up. And now you do. Everyone does. You smug son of a—" She launched toward me, fists clenched, but her brother stepped in, caught her mid-motion, held her back as she sobbed and screamed, and the entire room recoiled in a wave of shock and second-hand humiliation. Someone filmed. Someone else walked out. Her friend muttered, "She's lost it." And through it all, I stood there, untouched, unmoved, watching the collapse I had engineered with surgical precision unfold like a symphony of consequences. She screamed my name like a curse, like she still had power in it, but there was no weight behind it anymore. Just the hollow sound of someone who'd lost control of every narrative, every relationship, every illusion she thought she could maintain. She sank to the floor, hands over her face, sobbing into her own silence, surrounded by the fragments of a life she had set on fire. And I turned, without another word, walked through the door with every eye in the room following. Not because I was loud, not because I was angry, but because I was finished. And that's what truly destroyed her. She vanished for a while after the explosion, as if disappearing could somehow erase what she'd done. Her social media accounts went dark. Mutual friends stopped mentioning her. Her sister told me she'd moved out of town, that she was trying to start over somewhere quieter. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, probably because she knew no one would listen. Her job let her go within a week of the engagement party. The board had lost confidence in her ability to represent their values. No ceremony, no farewell lunch. Just an email and a security escort. The whispers followed her out, volunteers avoiding eye contact, coworkers deleting group chats. Even Amanda, her supposed ride or die, blocked her the day after the truth surfaced. She tried to spin it at first, told a few people I'd set her up, that I was controlling and vindictive. But no one believed her. Not after seeing the receipts, the messages, the footage. Not after watching her unravel in real time. She sent me a message 2 months later, late at night, just a line that read, "I miss you. I still love you." I didn't answer. A week passed. Then another. She tried again. "I made a mistake. Please, just talk to me." Still nothing. Then she showed up, mid-afternoon, unannounced, at my house. The same house I'd rebuilt after removing every trace of her. She looked smaller, like she'd shrunk into herself. No makeup. Hair tied up like she didn't care anymore. Clothes loose, plain. She didn't smile. Didn't pretend. She just stood on my porch, eyes red, hands shaking slightly as she held a wrinkled letter in one hand and a set of keys in the other. "I don't know what I thought would happen," she said, her voice hoarse like she hadn't used it in days. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I think about you every day. About what I did. About what I lost." I didn't invite her in. I didn't ask why she came. I let her speak because I wanted to hear the end of her voice in my life. "I got a job at a diner," she continued. "The kind where nobody asks who you are. I rent a room in someone else's house. I ride a bus now." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "It's crazy, right? How fast everything went from perfect to this." I didn't respond. I didn't move. She looked at me like she was searching for the man who used to love her, but I wasn't there. She'd buried him with every lie, every betrayal, every fake smile she weaponized to buy herself one more week of comfort while sneaking off with someone else. "I know I don't deserve anything," she whispered, finally cracking. "But please, just tell me something. Anything. Even if it's that you hate me." I looked at her for a long moment. Not with anger. Not with pity. Just clarity. Then I took the keys from her hand, dropped them into the mailbox without a word, and said, "Strange. I don't even remember your name anymore." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, frozen, like the words had knocked the breath out of her lungs. Then she turned and walked away, back down the steps, back into whatever shadows she now called home. And I stood there, calm, whole, untouched, because I'd already buried the ghost she left behind. The woman on that porch wasn't my wife. She was a lesson, a warning, a name I no longer needed to speak. And to anyone listening, to anyone still wondering what the right thing is when your world shatters in silence, I ask you this. What would you have done if it was your wife?